I'm Dr Justine Reilly. I'm one of the directors of Sporting Heritage, and it is brilliant to be here with you all this morning. And we're able to deliver this seminar thanks to the players of the National Lottery and Heritage Fund. So just a shout out to them and for their support and being able to carry on doing this work. So a few housekeeping things before we start. If everyone could keep their audio off, that'd be amazing, and stay on mute. If you have anything that you want to comment on or any questions for the panel, please do drop them in the chat. We will keep looking at them through the first part, and I'll try and make sure to share those with the panel. If you can keep your video off in this first part as well, that would be brilliant because it'll help people be able to see who's speaking and who's on the panel. Yes, use the chat for questions. We should have closed captions on. So if you want to use those, you find those more straightforward, please do use those. And I think that's kind of it for the sort of what we need to do for housekeeping. The first part of the session today is going to be a panel discussion, and we'll introduce our speakers in a moment. The panel will probably be about an hour and 15 minutes. And then we'll have a short comfort break, 10 minutes, so you can go get a cuppa. And then I'm going to hand over to Fran, who's organised this event, who's going to lead the second part, which will be a network discussion where if you've got any questions or any things you want to share, you've got half an hour, 35 minutes to discuss that during that time. And yes, please do use the chat to introduce yourselves, share any information that you want to as well. That's brilliant. And oh, wow, hello. People already in there, so that's great. I'm on about the fourth bout of COVID, so my voice is going to stop at some point, but I'm hopeful that the panel will be able to keep it going, and I've got so much to share that will be fine. So before we go any further, I'm going to introduce our panellists and give them a couple of minutes to tell you about themselves and about why they're here and how that's relevant to the session. So I'm going to start with Helena. You're first on my screen.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Justine. Hi there. So I am from the National Archives based in Kew. I'm here today because I'm hoping I can share what help and advice the National Archives can give you if you've got records at risk. We've got a whole host of people across the English regions that are there to support, and lots of guidance on our website as well. So as we go through the session this morning, I'll be signposting to advice and guidance and hopefully just answering any queries that you have. I'm an archivist. I've been in the sector over 20 years, and before joining the National Archives around 3 years ago, I was a local authority archive in Archivist in Liverpool, where I looked after quite a few sporting collections. So I'm very happy to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Helena. I'm going to move on to Philip, because there's so many similarities between your work.
Well, I'm Philip Gale. I'm head of the collections and cultural property team in the same department as Helena. I've been in Archivist for 40 years, so my role is very much around the Records at Risk grant, and I have a sort of informal lead on vulnerable collections, which I share with my colleague Philippa Turner in the Regional Networks team. She leads on crisis management team and business archives. I tend to lead on other collections that are at risk. I have been involved in the creation of our Records and Risk grant scheme, which is an emergency scheme that gives out emergency grants for collections at imminent risk. I'm also involved in the resilience panel, and I'm also had some involvement in some of the guidance, some of which you hopefully be able to pick up through my chat box posting. The first one you probably won't get access to, because I think that's actually a presentation that won't get through on your links, but to the rest you should be able to access. And I've done work on things like mold. So I'm interested in the variety of threats to collections, including the physical ones, such as mold and neglect, but also the more intangible risks that come with undervaluing the material you hold and not thinking long-term about its long-term preservation and access.
Oh, amazing. Thanks, Philip. And loads of things that I think we're going to talk about as we go over the next hour and a half. Karl, you're next on my screen.
Morning, everyone. My name's Karl Magee. I'm the University Archivist at University of Stirling, and we have a large and growing sporting heritage collection here. The core of our collection is basically centred around the archives of Commonwealth Games Scotland. We basically have material relating to the Scottish team's participation in the Commonwealth Games going right back to the very first competition in 1930. The offices of Commonwealth Games Scotland are based here on Stirling campus, so we have that direct link, ongoing current link with Commonwealth Games Scotland. And from that, our kind of sporting collections have grown. We've made links with kind of national sporting bodies at the Scottish level, local sporting clubs, and perhaps kind of most importantly, personal collections of individuals who were connected with either Commonwealth Games Scotland or other sporting organisations. And there's a kind of wealth of material in the personal collections. The other kind of key element, I suppose, in terms of our work is we several years ago we got funding to create a brand new digitisation studio, and part of the kind of case for getting that funding was that we were going to support the wider local heritage sector. So we have done a lot of work with kind of local sporting groups in terms of digitising their collections.
Amazing, thanks so much, Karl. And Kenny.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kenny McLean. I work at the Jim Clark Motorsport Museum here in Duns in Berwickshire on the Scottish borders. Hopefully some of you have heard of who Jim Clark was, but for those that haven't, he was Formula One driver. He was twice world champion in the 1960s. In fact, 1965, we're celebrating this year the 60th anniversary, winning 5 championships in the one season. And so he's a great figure in Scottish motorsport. And the museum was set up about 6 years ago from an old display room that was much expanded. So we're a local authority museum run by a trust. I'm the assistant to the curator, and I'm the learning and engagement officer here. Our link today is that we got a grant, which was much appreciated through Sporting Heritage early in the year, to digitise some of our film and audio material, and we'll talk about that later on, no doubt. And we're at an interesting place just now because of the kind of generational shift that's happening with a lot of Jim Clark's fans kind of reaching old age and things now, and what that's meaning for collections we're aware of and donations to the museum and so forth. So yeah, so we're a small local museum, and it's an interesting place for us in this bigger issue we're going to hear about later on.
Oh, thanks so much, Kenny. And we are due to have another panellist join as well at some point, but also may have had an issue with the link. So if they arrive, I'll introduce them at some point, so that you can see that they're here too. And then just a bit on sporting heritage. So it's National Sport and Heritage Day next week, on the 30th of September. We'll drop the link in for if you have socials for you to share any of your work or anything that you're doing around that. And it's brilliant to see the change and the transition in the way that people are thinking about sporting heritage generally. We set the organisation up about 12, 13 years ago, and to see the shift, and it's brilliant even to look at the panellists and go, oh my goodness, to be able to have you here talking about the importance of sporting heritage and the work that you've done, even in that short space of time, it seems that people are really starting to take these collections seriously and recognise why they're important to communities, which when we started off, it felt like that was a real uphill battle. And I think there's still huge issues, which we'll probably cover in a moment, but it's just really good to kind of sit here now and go, okay, this is where we're at. And collections at risk and protecting collections is a massive part of our work still. And it keeps me awake at night sometimes, knowing some of the collections that are significantly at risk and the reasons why they are. So before we go any further, I'm going to ask the first question and see who wants to answer it, because it's quite a big one. So how can we identify when a collection is at risk? Philip, you had some great things that you spoke about in your introduction. So if no one else
we've actually got some guidance on this. And if you look at the chat, I think it's records at risk, archive sector, that will give you a sort of checklist of the things to look out for. I think that there are two things really. There are two levels of risk. One is the physical survival of material, and also that includes also digital material that may not survive, if not physically, in the hyperspace. So there is the risk of it just not actually being surviving. And areas where you can use material that's abandoned, either whether it's curated analog or digital, that's always an area of risk. If it's inaccessible, is another area where I think is a high warning mark. And also another area, and I think it's particularly true of a lot of sporting records, it is whether it's unknown. And if it's not known, its significance may not be realized. So, I mean, if I were to sum up, I think it's the imminent peril of physical survival or digital survival, the risk of inaccessibility, and that's disincentivizing its future preservation. And finally, if it's just not known and its value is not appreciated. So if you like, there's a trinitarian sort of levels of risk, and they're all interconnected. And there are also, you can examine those risks in further detail. So physical risks can fall into just neglect, but there are occasions in history where there has been malicious and deliberate destruction of material, often for political reasons. So, you know, one hopes with sporting records that's a very rare event, but one should bear in mind that that's another level of risk. And the other thing to bear in mind is the levels of risk, is the imminency of risk. Clearly, if something's abandoned in a warehouse and the warehouse is going to be demolished, the risk is very imminent indeed. With a lot of digital material, it's a much more slow and creeping risk. And so there may be not a clear point where you tip into unrecoverability in terms of the material that you're trying to preserve. So there's also the time frame and how quickly an intervention is required. I hope that's a coherent start.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks. Thanks, Philip. I'm going to ask everyone else as well. To add to, I mean, I think that's a brilliant kind of précis of all of the different kind of areas that things are at risk. And I particularly think for us, we see that not valuing is quite a significant issue. People not really recognising and often saying, oh, well, it's only this and it's not important. Or, you know, oh, it's my kit, so it's not valuable. And it's trying to kind of shift that perspective of, but it is valuable and these are the reasons why. And that's quite a difficult kind of educational piece, but also kind of getting to the people to say, yeah, it is important. Your story is important, or your collection's important for now, but also in the future. So, yeah, before we go any further, I'm just going to introduce Jennie. Hi, Jennie.
Hello, I'm so sorry I'm late. I'm so sorry. I'm here.
Don't worry. So Jennie's from Bramley Bath. She's going to talk about how collections at risk links to your work, and I'll give you a bit of time later if you want to share a bit more about the work you've been doing as well. We're just talking about how do you know and identify that a collection is at risk in the first instance. So does anyone else on the panel want to kind of come in? Karl, go on. I often talk about the Bath situation that you talk about.
Just some kind of more general points from experience, following up from what Philip has said. I mean, one of the things we found it's when either individuals or organizations are physically moving premises. So if someone's moving house, or if a governing body is moving office, or if a club is moving clubhouse, you know, the heritage archive material isn't always the priority. Archivists always fear skips. If you see a skip outside the building, you go, what is going in that skip? And that applies across all archive collections. So, you know, we've been contacted quite often by people who are clearing out the attic and have found material in the attic. And, you know, do you want it? Because if you don't want it, it's going in the bin. So yeah, so the whole physical move of premises is one key thing. Also you know, Philip mentioned the kind of unknown in terms of knowing what material there is, and there is a kind of it isn't peculiar to sport and heritage, but it's quite common, the kind of loss of institutional memory, if you want to call it that, because there's so many personnel changes on committees of clubs or on, you know, the governing bodies of sporting bodies, that the kind of knowledge of collections can be lost as people come and go. And I think there is a job there within sports clubs and sporting bodies to kind of preserve the memory within the organization, so that when people leave and new people come in, the kind of new people are made aware of the heritage that's there. Because we've had that experience speaking to people in various sporting bodies where the current people aren't aware of the heritage, and we've had to say to them, you know, well, your records are in the National Library of Scotland, and they go, oh, are they? You know, so there is that work to do as well.
Crikey, it's when you start adding up, isn't it? And you start thinking about, I mean, it is something that does consistently, and has since sporting heritage existed, been a key priority, but something that is so difficult to manage because of the cost implications of doing that. So we try and do things like this where we're supporting people in different ways, but it is coming to a crunch time where we are spending so much time now trying to prevent collections from disappearing. That it's really formulating our ideas on what next, how do we stop that. So yeah, this is great. Kenny, yeah, brilliant, there you are.
Yeah, just to actually mirror a bit of what's already been said, certainly both at the museum here and in other areas of life. To give you a couple of examples, I'm chairman and kind of temporary secretary of the local history society in the town, and involved in other things. I'm involved in the local regional football leagues and so on. And I think so much of it is coming down to personal connections, kind of in two directions, actually. A lot of the time, it's about keeping your ear to the ground and kind of following your nose, if I'm not mixing my metaphors there. And you know, hearing about an organisation or an individual person who you know is, you've heard maybe they're thinking about getting rid of a collection, or it can even be someone like, you know, someone's moving house, or exactly, just kind of making yourself aware of that, and not necessarily approaching them directly, but being aware that, you know, in case there's word on the grapevine. The other way around, of course, is just being there and being accessible. The amount of stuff we get to the museum where people have just thought, I'll pick up the phone or I'll drop them an email and say, you've almost certainly got this, but, and then of course the reply is, no, we don't actually. And we're not aware that 123 archives have that either. And so I think just being that open accessibility, so people feel the confidence that they're not going to sort of get dismissed or told, oh, don't be silly, of course you've already got that. It's about being open to that. You almost, I think, and it's particularly in a rural area like this, kind of when people hear of you, both in the museum context or something like the local history society, we get a lot of on-spec stuff now, actually. Someone's got something they think is of cultural value, in this case sporting value, and they have an instinct that someone ought to preserve it, they don't really know who. And so quite a lot of the time we're just acting as a gateway to send someone on to the local authority archive. Sorry, a bit of racket in the background. We've got a car getting changed over today. So there's local authority archives, or a different history society, or in our museum, etc., etc. So I think that's kind of, you know, there's probably a little spread like a blanket across the whole country of people who will be a direction to folk. And just to latch on to what I mentioned in my introduction, what we're finding with the Jim Clark at the moment is, you know, his heyday was the late 50s to the late 1960s. So all these people that were his contemporaries, they were teammates, mechanics, journalists, or just regular fans, they're all now in their 70s, 80s, 90s. They're either passing away, sadly, or they're perhaps having to downsize, you know, moving into smaller accommodation. And so that there's a real kind of rising crest of the amount of inquiries we get about material. And sometimes, of course, unfortunately, it's too late. You speak to someone else and they say, oh, Jim Smith had a load of stuff, but I hear that he died and his family just put it into a skip, sort of thing. And we all know that happens all the time. It's unfortunate. So it's that aspect of how we deal with that going forward, because we do get a lot of material that we already have, but it's very, very rare for not to be something in it that we think, oh, great, we haven't seen that before. And particularly some of the 1960s, it's the era of mass media, and yet there was no central archiving any of this stuff. There wasn't even really a Scottish Motorsport Association at the time, and certainly at a British level, they weren't archiving a lot of this type of thing. Even things like race programs, or even the results of some minor races. If it's not reported in the newspaper, we've actually got kind of blanks in his Jim Clark's career story. So yeah, there's an awful lot of material out there. I think it's very much about you being kind of known and finding out who might be out there with interesting material. But as much of it is just on spec. And I can even come in on a Monday morning. In fact, it's happened today on a Wednesday morning. I've come into work and someone said, this person's dropped off a folder with some bits and pieces in it. I've not had a chance to look at it yet, but it's an example of what happens all the time. So it's that two-way thing of being known, keeping your ear to the ground, but also just being accessible so people can approach you and you can point them in the right direction.
Oh, thanks so much, Kenny. I mean, the first thing is, have you got a roving camera so that we can see what's going on? It sounds too exciting to miss. And then, yeah, I mean, that kind of, we get it all the time. We'll get emails. We've got this collection, it's going to go, or my mum's uniform is here. Does anyone want it? And the first issue that we usually have is, particularly if it's a collection, is what is it? What's in there? What do you have? And because most people, it's their own private collection, or it's a small collection that's from a club. And so we're trying to work out, well, who can we direct it to? Who can we send that to? What geographical remit is it? If it's a sport that we don't know, there's no one's got an interest in, or no one's been collecting, we're trying to work out, what have you got? How much have you got of it? And who might we be able to send that to? And fairly frequently. And I can see that's probably happening for loads of us. We're doing that kind of sort of triaging. And our toolkit tries to help people through that. But again, if that's not your job and you're not coming from a heritage background, it's quite a big piece of work to think, okay, how do I start an inventory? And how do I say, well, it's this amount? It's really difficult, isn't it? And I think particularly for sporting heritage, because it hasn't been something that's been valued within the heritage sector, and most people have been collecting that outside of that. It's that individual kind of collections that tell the sum of the sporting past. And there's a comment in the chat about greyhound track racing, and that collection again is split amongst private collectors, and the scoping that we do is finding that out across sports again and again, that these people have gone, like you said, Kenny, I know this needs to be protected, but I'm just not sure how to do it. So they're doing it and then getting to a stage where they need to find another home. So thank you. It's making my thought process work as well here. Helena or Jennie, Helena, go on. Give you a bit more of a breathing space, Jennie.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's kind of knowing who you can approach for help. If you do spot a collection at risk. Now I'm going to pop a little slide in the chat. I'm just going to do that now. TNA, now this is across the English regions, have sector development managers, and I've popped it in the chat. So if you did spot a collection at risk, that would be a good place to sort of reach out to Catherine or Rachel or Liz or whoever it might be, wherever you live, and say, I've spotted this collection. I think it's serious risk. The building's been, sort of moved on or whatever. And they can hopefully sort of direct you to someone who may be able to assist, or point you to some guidance about how you can protect, like physically actually protect that collection as well. And maybe we want to kind of talk about that a bit later on, about the different ways to do that. But yeah, I think just, from a TNA's point of view, there are people who can help you, and sort of hopefully you don't need to do all the digging about where to get help. They can help you with that.
Thanks, Helena. And yeah, brilliant job. Any of those kind of things in the chat, really helpful to have that direction. And Fran's put a link to the collections at risk in a toolkit. And I think that's it. It's trying to make sure that we can give people that signposting, isn't it, to the support. Jennie, do you want to introduce a bit about yourself while we're here and let people know? Yeah.
I will, thank you, that's lovely. So I'm Jennie, I work at Bramley Baths in Leeds. So a bit of context, we are the last remaining fully functional Edwardian bathhouse in Leeds. So we've got a pool, we've got a gym, we've got a studio for classes, which you might be able to hear in the background, like Kenny, there's things going on. I think there's a boxing bag hung up somewhere. So yeah, it's wonderful. Like it's it was built for health and wellbeing purposes 121 years ago, and it's still going. So that's fantastic. So as far as our collections, I would say our physical assets, as in just things like trophies, that kind of thing, we are quite limited, and we do again rely on people kind of turning up. But I suppose the most recent example of that was so in the 90s we were really lucky in the 90s, especially in Leeds. A lot of the original bathhouses were getting bulldozed down, rebuilt, all that kind of stuff, and our local community, as it still is today, rallied around and said, no, we don't want that. Will you put some money into it? Which the council at the time did in the 90s, which is fantastic. So the most recent thing we had was a lovely chap came to reception with 2 A4 binders with photographs of the refurbishment. So there was like a before and an after, and the work that went on. So the transitioning from the old building that needed a lot of help, and a lot of parts of it were in decay, and then the like 3-year project of restoring it in the 90s. And he literally came and said, I don't think you'll need these, but yeah, see you later. And we all went, this is amazing. It's such an insight into the 90s as alone, and in what state the building was in, but it just opened up so many doors, and we were like, this is amazing. And obviously we thanked him. So yeah, we do rely on that. Like I say, we've got a few kind of shields, that kind of thing, with the baths on there. My favourite part of the sort of physical stuff is some photographs from the last living family, which again, they were from the 90s. They were the last that sort of moved out in the 90s when they did a refurb, and and the mum of the family still comes and uses the bath. So that's a nice sort of, she's got the photographs of her family growing up here, which is wonderful. So I would say our assets that we want to preserve, as well as obviously the building, is the stories and the social histories and how we. So one way we've done that, there was a project a few years ago run by one of the groups that uses our facilities called the Bramley Mermaids, and they're very inclusive, synchronized swimming team, which they're just fabulous. Anyway, very arts and culture focused, and they wanted to do just that, preserve the stories, that kind of thing. So we've got some beautiful sound bites. Some are really short, some are about an hour of just interviews with people that used to use the baths and the different ways that it was used, and it's amazing. But they kind of sit in the white, I think they're on SoundCloud somewhere, so they kind of just sit there, which is lovely. Most recently we use those stories and some of those sections for a podcast. So that was our first kind of podcast celebrating 120 years of the baths. And so that was a really nice way of not only preserving those wonderful social stories that the kids just aren't going to be able to, like learning to swim with a rope around your waist is just so out of the realms of contemplation for the kids, with the armbands and you know what I mean? Like that, like a lady speaking to that effect, drinking the Horlicks, and it's just all those wonderful little jewels that, like I say, kids are never going to understand that. And even, so as well, way back in the 60s and 70s, we used to drain the pool and put a board over, and it would, like many places, become a dance hall because they couldn't afford to heat the water over the winter months. So again, that just won't, well, I hope it will at some point, but at the moment it's not a possibility. But again, I can't imagine that. I'm from a dance background, and to imagine our pool with a floor over the top with a glitter ball, which is spoken about, is just mind-blowing. And so again, listening to these ladies and these gents speak about the times when they'd get dressed up, and there was forgive me if I get this wrong, the teddy boys and the teddy girls and the whole thing. Yeah, just the stories that they come up with, and again, how we preserve that, because like you've mentioned as well, Kenny, that those people unfortunately won't be with us for very much longer. And how do we get those stories, and most importantly, celebrate them as well? Because like I said, the podcast was kind of the first way that we want to do that, as preserving the heritage, and so we can share it as well with other people as well. Like you say, sometimes we get these things and they're wonderful, but then how do we share them and celebrate them? And yeah, so I suppose that's where we're kind of coming from, I suppose.
Oh, that's amazing, Jennie. And Bramley Baths is part of my heritage. So I live down the road, and I've played in a band on the side, and we've nearly fallen in, and so my kids were taught by Jennie, I think. Anyway, so there's it's part of the heritage, and it's part of the community, and I wanted to kind of, and it's brilliant that you've brought all of that up, because I think you've all touched on it. But when we talk about our collections and our collections of sporting heritage, yes, it's all the physical stuff, but it's that kind of, where does sporting heritage fit in the community, and the stories and the intangible heritage? And we're doing a lot of work on that at the moment, and trying to, because sporting heritage is like, it's happening now, and it's so vibrant in the way that it isn't just about objects. It's about the stories, the traditions, the songs, everything else that tells that kind of story, and how it fits within our communities. And that even if you've not got an interest in sport, there's probably going to be something that your past or your current activity is participating in. You know, it might be a local bowling club. That's where you go and have events, or, you know, whatever way that might be, you're probably connected some way to sport. And yeah, so in a kind of like long way round of saying, do you think that there is some kind of vulnerability about our collections because we have that kind of real link to intangible heritage that isn't always recognised or protected in the same way as physical stuff? So yeah, whoever wants to come in and discuss that with me. Oh, silence, Joel. Philip, there we go.
Well, I think the thing about sporting heritage is it's part of a wider society. I mean, I remember the opening passage of J.B. Priestley's novel Good Companions, which I think was published about 1935. It describes a crowd leaving a football match, if I remember correctly. And I think my point would be that, you know, sporting records are at the core of virtually all communities in some shape or form. I mean, I live in Tunbridge in Kent, and we have a local cricket club, a local rugby club, and there's a local bowling club and a tennis club. And you put those together, they represent much more the weft and weave of local community than probably the churches do now, because, you know, the way society's become more secular. So I think because they're almost like water coming out of the tap, people just take it as a given. And we simply can't assume, especially in the digital age, that, you know, by benign neglect, it will just survive. So I think what we're capturing is actually some very important communal social activity that brings people together, that creates identities more beyond the individual, because most sports are about teams, and then those teams create communities, and those communities feed into the local identity. And so I think in a way that is its great strength, but also its vulnerability, because people just take it as a given. And I think if one thing we could take away from this morning, it would be that a curatorial tradition and planning is actually essential to maintain the story of each individual sport at a local and a national level going forward, that it can't just look after itself, that it has to be positively managed and planned for, because it's such an important part of our society and understanding how we work as a society.
Oh, thanks so much, Philip.
I sound like a priest.
Many of those quotes may find themselves in my next funding application. I mean, I can't agree more. Kenny.
Yeah, just to pick up on something that Philip was alluding to there. I work at a second job in the museum service in the general area, so not specifically Jim Clark, therefore not specifically sporting heritage. And one difference I certainly notice, and this also applies in the local context with our local history society and so on, is that, of course, by and large, the sporting institutions, as you say, in the town, you know, tennis, rugby, golf, football, they're largely autonomous in a way that, say, local government or the schools or the church is not. And therefore, there isn't so much oversight in the way that, you know, records get produced and checked and maintained. And there isn't therefore also the same sort of formality as if the club closes where the records go, or, you know, there's such a turnover of people that are secretaries, chairmen, treasurers, etc., etc. And I certainly noticed this in the local area, that, you know, sadly a lot of amateur football teams might fold. What even happens to the medals, the trophies, the photographs on the wall? And the answer very often seems to be basically the dyed-in-the-wool committee keep them. And then in 10 or 20 years' time, when they're moving or getting older or so on. And I think one of the point I wanted to make was it's interesting how much of the transmission we're getting with motorsport material to the Jim Clark Museum or other sporting material to the local history society is at one person removed from the individual that actually kept and curated it. So it's very often that a neighbour knew that old Jim had a load of stuff, Jim was putting it out, and the neighbour thought it was important, so he said, chuck it out to me. Or it's that the son or the daughters kept things that their father or their mother had and they passed away 30 years ago, and now they themselves are maybe reaching retirement or something, and they're thinking about, oh, I've got all that in the loft that I kept from my mum, what shall we do with it? And of course, one of the consequences of that is that you lose a bit of the context of exactly what the material was, how it was assembled. I mean, it's good to have it, but you're losing that directness of being able to ask someone, we went through it and we're interested in what that was, could you explain how that came about? So we're finding a lot of that kind of second-hand, a one-person removed type environment. And it's a challenge. Of course, the ideal would be that you get in before that's all happened. But of course, you can't prove an unknown until someone turns up with the stuff and says, oh, we never knew that stuff existed. So I thought that was just an interesting point. It's the autonomy of it all, which is a great strength of sport, of course, why it's local and grassroots, but equally its vulnerability that there's not usually a big oversight. I know a couple of sports may be an exception to that, but certainly in general, it's up to the local body to decide what they do, and that's a strength and a weakness in this context.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That, and linking with what Philip said as well, there's not that oversight, it's not that planned. How are we going to protect this? It definitely doesn't exist at government level. We don't have any funding that comes directly to sporting heritage activity. No museums are funded, no sporting museums are funded directly through DCMS anymore. And nobody cared when that stopped happening. There was only one when it happened, but nobody was really that bothered. But then, like Philip says, it's integral to our societies. Why is it that this is such an integral part, but actually we don't feel like we should fund it? Sorry, Karl, go ahead.
Yeah, just to kind of personal experience of that, wider value of sport beyond the actual competition and participation itself. To go back to the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games has been a perfect example of how basically the sport took over the city. We were down there with an archive exhibition for the duration of the games, right in the middle of it, and it was amazing the wider impact the games had in Glasgow. And I suppose another factor to consider as well is volunteers, the people who volunteer on beyond actually participating. So the stewards and the organizers and the guides and everything else, and that was a huge element of the Glasgow 2014 games, and people were proud of the part they played in making the games such a success. And it's going to be very interesting to see next year, because the Commonwealth Games is coming back to Glasgow in 2026, although in a much reduced version, for various reasons. So it's going to be a much smaller event, and it's going to be interesting to see whether next year the games have the same impact as they did back in 2014.
Thanks, Karl. Yeah, I mean, it will be. And that kind of, Fran's just dropped something in the chat as well about, that kind of, often sports, there's an assumption that sports are doing this, but they're not, because they see it as heritage. And heritage will see it as sport, and trying to make that argument of saying, no, actually, it's both of your kind of interests, but it's predominantly sport needs to be thinking, how do we look after this? We're so busy making things happen. I've been speaking with Glasgow and saying, oh, what are you doing around heritage? And it's really difficult to try and get them to think about that. Karl, go on.
Yeah, just following that up, I mean, we do have a quite positive experience with Commonwealth Games Scotland, in the sense that because of our work with them, they actually get the value of their heritage. It's probably quite unusual in terms of bodies, but they now see the value of it, because we've constantly said to them, look at what you've got, look at what you can do with it. So basically every game since 2014, we have had an archive exhibition in Scotland House, which is basically the team headquarters for the Scottish teams at the Games, and they've been kind of made aware of the value, and they're quite keen to continue to promote their own heritage. So I suppose it's an example that it can be done. It just takes work, you know.
Yeah, great. And that kind of, I think the point you made about and what you can do with it, because it's got to be why should we be protecting this? And I think the more we can make those examples, and again, there's some other good stuff that's happening at Heritage Quay, for example, and at De Montfort, where they're protecting those collections for national sports. So there's examples of that happening and shifting, and I think the more we can use those to say, look, this is why it works, I think more sports will go, oh, okay, I get it. And then if we can have that patchwork at the bottom helping to signpost people, I think that could be a really good way of working. And I mean, that was something I wanted to come on to as well. So we've kind of talked about collections being at risk, how we identify them, the different kinds of collections that are at risk, and why that happens. So what can we do? What can we do about that? And I know you're dropping, Helena and Philip, some brilliant examples in there, and Fran from the toolkit. What do you think are the next steps, and how we can help that and support organisations and community clubs or people who think, I've got this, I'm not sure what to do with it? We've touched on it a bit, but what do you think? Go on, Philip.
Well, I think the two things. One is guidance and sharing intelligence, and getting it out to as many people as possible. We at TNA have done some work around this. You'll see in the chat I've done a link to our records at risk pages, but that is, we can't do it on our own. So I think one is getting the message out that there is help out there through our regional networks team, as Helena has pointed out, and also circulating the guidance that are already existing to as widely as possible. And the other thing, and I think my colleague James Hodgson may be a participant in this seminar, is also to point people to where there might be sources of funding that may be able to assist. Because it's one thing to want to do something, but you need resource. And in this regard, we have at TNA a small records at risk fund, which so far this year has had 10 applications and 5 grants awarded to a variety of collections that have faced imminent peril. And also to look at not just think about what you want to do, what's your ambition for the collection that you're trying to protect. Because it's one thing to save it, but you also want to have an active thought about how you're going to use it, so that it becomes a working asset for all the stakeholders. It could be for the club, or it could be for the local community, and quite how that looks is going to be case by case, because obviously if it is an archive of a club that no longer exists, then it's a different case to a club that still does exist. So I think those are the two starting points, which is to communicate as clearly and widely as possible the sources of advice are available and where to go to help, and also to communicate where you might get some resource, either in terms of monetary or advice, to help you go forward. And finally, as I say, to have a plan and what you're going to do with the material once you've saved it, because it's got to be a working asset. It's got to have its continuing witness into future generations.
Thanks, Philip. Yeah, it's that why, what for, isn't it? And the funding question is consistently an issue. We have the community grants, which have helped a lot of that kind of starting work to take place. But I think investment and capacity, yeah. Jennie?
I think that couldn't agree more what you're saying there, Philip. It's got to be on a case by case basis, and knowing what and shouting about it and the rest of it. But I think there's something in getting the youth involved as well, because obviously, and young people, do you know what I mean? We're really lucky that a lot of schools use us for swimming lessons. We've got kids coming for swimming lessons, but they've got a completely different outlook on life, and they've got access to so much digital stuff. So how can we engage the youth in a way for them, rather than trying to, obviously we've got a massive interest in heritage and preserving that, but how do we get to the youth? How do we get to the kids and really get them excited and want and feel like they're part of it, like this is their heritage and it's worth preserving? So we've got a heritage exhibition around our pool, and it was put together by a lovely chap called Jordan Keithley, and he is on the younger end, I would say, of the spectrum, and he's gone on to be the youth part of the youth curation team, at Leeds Leeds Museum. Sorry, that took a long time to get out of my mouth there. But yeah, so I think Jordan, as an example, he adored the place, did a history degree and really got into it and did all the deep dive into to create our heritage exhibition. So I think there's something in that, like getting the youth involved and speaking and find out what they want, as opposed to us thinking we know that this is, rather than us making a TikTok and going, this is cool, because I definitely know my 15-year-old would not think it was cool, if that's even a word anymore. Is that even a word, cool, anymore? So I think it's
a word
how do we get those? Yeah. Who knows? So yeah, how do we get involved with them? And it's probably through engaging with them, inviting them along. What do you want to see, like, and that kind of things. That's probably what I'd say.
No, I think that's really, really brilliant though, Jennie, in terms of what you're doing and the way you're using the activity of the pool now and the various different things that are happening there to engage people to talk about the heritage. And so it's being central. It's like you say, you've got the exhibition around the bath, so it's not hidden away. It's part of what's happening now. So it's going back to what Philip's saying about that plan, isn't it, as well? So why are you doing it? And it's so that people really connect and believe in what you're doing as an organisation. And there is that kind of feel of, this is important. This is something we want to preserve and share these stories. And it's a brilliant case study of how you can do that work and make sure that it's, make sure it's continuing. So yeah, thank you. Kenny, there we go.
Yes, two things on exactly that. I think, first of all, for people to see that someone else has given material and it's been used, a bit like what Philip was saying there. We've had an example where, thanks to the support of Sporting Heritage, we were able to digitise a lot of our film cans of all weird and wonderful varieties, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even VHS cassettes and audio tapes. But we've now been able to put that onto a new touchscreen in the museum. People can come and listen to watch the clips. And our hope is, going forward, because we've got information beside it about, how it's all come about, someone else will come in and say, oh, well, I've got something at home. Maybe the museum would like that too, because they might do something with it. And I think that encouragement, you can do it obviously online through all the social media opportunities we have nowadays as well. And I think that hopefully will fuel people to feel that actually, if I donate that to the museum or the archive, wherever it might be, or the governing body, if they've got their own preservation system, that it will actually have a life. It won't just be put on a shelf somewhere and forgotten about for the rest of time. That's better than it going in a skip. But obviously a lot of people they've cherished something themselves. They want to see it live on in a different way. The other point I would just say is that, putting my football hat on outside of work, I'm the fixture secretary for a couple of the regional football leagues in Scotland. And I certainly see that there is more and more interest, I think particularly because people want content for social media and for membership schemes and all this sort of stuff. There is more and more interest in the heritage aspect of a lot of these clubs. Obviously people's support initially comes in the here and now. Who are we playing on Saturday? Are we going to win the cup? How are we doing in the league, etc., etc. But if I look back to 20 years ago, when I was at school, etc., university onwards, I think there's been a build-up of this kind of wanting content and material and interest. And, a lot of it, certainly the smaller clubs, they just don't have it because no one kept it. And they come to the league, or they come to the local museum or the archives, in our case over in Hoyok, and they're hoping that materials survived. And, almost to come round in a full circle, they're going to hope that someone 30 years ago donated all the minute books or the old photos or all the pictures they had on the wall of the local pub when it shut. Hopefully someone in the street took them and put them in their garage. It's weird how it's kind of coming 360 degrees in some respects. So there's that latent kind of appeal for it out there, I think, and it's trying to make that a way for people, first of all, to encourage them to keep more stuff just now in an organised fashion, and secondly, to be that vehicle to receive in things that are out there. People have got this stuff in one form or another, but it's just scattered. So I think people to see it being used and a sense that it's got a value, maybe more than it had in 20, 30, 40 years ago, is great. But a little parting thought for you is, with football context, if a club comes to me, Kenny, we're doing a bit of history stuff, we know you're a history man, we want to know who scored all our goals in the Scottish Cup over the years. We've played in the Scottish Cup 20 times, who scored the goals? I could pick up a book and in a minute tell them who scored the goals in 1965. I could probably look in the old newspaper archive, tell them who scored the goal in 1985. I would have my biggest struggle telling them who scored the goal in 2005. Because the local newspapers were in decline by then, it's not reporting so much, and it was digitalised in some form, but it's all scattered to the ether now. For example, last year, the Scottish FA adopted a new computer system. The old system is still there. You can kind of convolutedly get into it, but it's not intended for archival purposes. But what's going to happen to that? So it's this weird thing of, as we come into, and everybody will experience this, we come into the modern era, it's actually harder because no one's writing books anymore of that respect, unless they're a real dedicated club historian. The local press has declined. And I therefore wonder in another 20 years' time, when someone says, what happened in that match in 2025? And I wonder if someone will say, oh, well, Twitter's dead, or the website we had's long gone. We've had 6 versions since. So, yeah, it's an interesting thought on that aspect of it's valued more, the old stuff, but is the stuff right now being valued so that it's going to be the old stuff in decades' time?
Yeah, I mean, they have like some weird terms for it, like born digital and all manner of other things about contemporary collecting as well, that I think sometimes puts people off that aren't heritage professionals when we're using some of those terms, because essentially we're meaning the stuff, like you're saying, stuff that you're using today and valuing it. And I think there are some real issues around that, particularly when we haven't done the stuff in the past yet. We're still struggling with that. And I think you touched on it as well, Philip, about the need to be looking at how do we protect this digital collections that exist now. And yeah, again, it's another thing that keeps me awake at night, trying to work out what do we do? We're a tiny organisation. How do we ensure that we can support that understanding and that share? And it is something that we're thinking about now. How do we do that? But it's a massive job because there are so many collections, and it's brilliant that you guys are doing that. You're doing that on the ground and you're making that happen. So the more we can, get funding in and shout about it. But it's a worry. It's a real concern. And I think you're right, Kenny, to be worrying about that. But also those positives around people are now starting to really understand and recognise and value collections that, maybe 10 years ago they weren't thinking about. So you're seeing that shift. And somebody's dropped in the chat as well, they're starting to see that change. Helena, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just thinking about the digital. I mean, we hear it a lot. It is quite scary prospect. You might have stuff on floppy disks, old VHS, you might have oral history recordings from members of your club that are sitting on old cassette tapes. What do you do with it? What do you do with, all that information that's sitting on X now that you kind of want to capture, but you don't know how to? I don't think there's an easy answer. But the National Archives and the Digital Preservation Coalition have put together a course, Novice to Know-How, and I'll drop a link in the chat. Feedback, some people love it, others think it's still that little stage to, it's still like quite hard to get to grips with a lot of it. But it does have a getting started section. So at the very least, if you're, if this is something that you're really concerned about, and you should be doing more to try and preserve those old medias even, that might be a good place for you to have a wee look at and just start to at least build your confidence levels as well.
Thanks, Helena. Yeah, if you could drop that in the chat, that'd be brilliant. So we've got about 10-15 minutes left, and we've talked about these collections, they exist, the kind of things that they're doing. But what I wanted to spend the last little bit on is the so why. We haven't spoken so much about why do we need to make sure that these collections aren't protected and are saved. And I'd just be really interested to hear from the panel about, that impact that you're seeing with the collections that you've saved or the work that you've done and the difference that they've made. And that so that it can help us with that argument of this is why it's so important. We know these collections are being skipped. We know that they're disappearing and we're seeing the kind of tip of the iceberg. Why do we need to make that stop? Why do we need to protect them? I don't know who wants to go first. Jennie?
I can go if you want, sorry. I think I'm going to use a really recent example, a really personal recent example. So I went to a Heritage Open Days archive thing, and my local place, where my family grew up was a place called Willetts, and my granddad owned a butcher's shop, and it's been in the family for hundreds of years. And there's a definite connection about being able to see your own lineage reflected in heritage, and that connection between heritage and well-being for me is one of the key reasons to preserve and keep heritage all day long. And like we keep saying about the sporting context, like you will, especially if your team wins, right? You know what I mean? You can, that feeling, that emotion, that feeling of community, feeling connection, it all links back to heritage and feeling a part of that. And I don't think you have to be a local person to also appreciate that. You can visit somewhere abroad, you know, wherever, and feel that connection to the heritage. And I think that sense of well-being that is so prominent these days about finding your place, finding that element of feeling well and all that kind of stuff. And heritage for me links into that all day long. And that, like I say, trying to encapsulate that feeling of well-being, and in the baths context and the swimming, learning to swim. Sometimes people's experience of learning to swim isn't necessarily a good one. However, the building itself is stunning. Like, do you know what I mean? So even if you are swimming in our building and it's not I'm not dissing any kind of new leisure centre, shall we say, but it's just got more soul, and it's just, you can feel the stories of the people. I think so. Yeah, for me, it's that the reason why we need to preserve these collections, the heritage in all aspects, is that connection to well-being, and that's just probably me from a really personal sort of passion that we keep the heritage for the link for the well-being. I think that's just me.
Oh, amazing, Jennie. Yeah. I mean, you come into those baths and you feel that connection. So yeah, there may be some quotes that I nick from there as well. Karl, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just a kind of couple of kind of broad areas in terms of, you know, the value of our collections and how they're used. I suppose being based in a university, you know, we can see the academic research value of sport and heritage. There's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of networks now of academics working on sport and heritage who are, you know, keen to get access to all these collections and work with them. You know, sport and heritage themselves have been involved in supporting postgraduate work and right across the research spectrum. So we kind of see the value in terms of that, and quite often, you know, sport and heritage collections can be of value beyond the history of sport. You know, I mean, looking at the Commonwealth Games archive, which obviously we're kind of closest to here, I mean, there's so many questions about Scottishness, about Scotland within the UK, Scotland within the Commonwealth, but about the Commonwealth itself. I mean, the first competition was the British Empire and Commonwealth Games, and there's been various terms have been dropped off it to it becoming the Commonwealth Games now. So, you know, your sporting collections can be of research value beyond the actual sport itself. They can tell you so much more about society and in the time that, you know, the sporting activity took place. In terms of, you know, the broader points like reminiscence groups and the value of sport, that's something that obviously is quite common. But again, we've been working with various groups in kind of reminiscence work, and you can really see how important sport and heritage material is there for sparking people's memories. And even just right down to the kind of personal value. You know, we've had a couple of recent examples of individuals who've brought in either their husbands or their parents' collection, and they're just so happy to see that people are interested in that person's career, because, you know, the kind of broader memory or recognition of what that person did may have been lost, and, you know, it means so much to individuals to have their loved ones' achievements recognized and preserved and ultimately celebrated through exhibition, promotion, even just the basic cataloging of a collection, so someone knows, you know, the collection is there and it's available, and it's kind of written down in black and white how important this person's sport and career was.
Thanks, Karl. I don't think you can underestimate, can you, that kind of recognition of this is important. And I think you've all at various different stages touched on that. And that change in the academic perception of sporting heritage. Again, when we started, I remember there were vaguely, not very many. I did a PhD in sporting heritage, and there weren't many people writing or interested. And there was a bit of snobbery, which still exists, but there was a little bit of snobbery about, you know, sport and where sport's position was in heritage, which I think is largely what has prevented the heritage sector from collecting in the first place, and why, you know, we see it happening in terms of individuals and clubs and people recognizing we need to look after this. And that shift is slowly happening, which is then saying these are important collections. Crikey, let's try and protect them. Kenny, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just concur with what's already been said. It's one little, to give you a local context again, you know, we're kind of lower levels of sport, you know, so not big professional clubs and so on in my part of the world. Another challenge is sometimes just the physical space. You know, the clubs themselves might not have much space in the clubhouse. And we in the museum have faced this challenge. We had a big rebuild in 2019, but like all these things, the budget began to run away from itself. So space was cut and reused, and we've actually just literally started converting our meeting room into a second storeroom because we're packed to the gunnels. And the History Society I'm involved with in the town, we had a nice archive room in the top floor of the Working Men's Institute. That institute has folded, so we've had to move out. We were struggling to find anywhere to go because there's so many public buildings being closed or mothballed, or well, the council might shut them in 5 years' time, so we don't want you to go in there. And we ended up in a local community centre, and literally on Monday night, I'm going to a public meeting because the council's talking about closing the community centre, and we're having to sort of do a public, you know, campaign to keep it. And so there's always this pressure on, well, we've got a lot of stuff, do we want to keep adding to it? And I mean, we're always trying to say, yes, you know, come and approach us, you know, we will take stuff of value. But you do worry about either places just losing a home and it all being sort of stuck in the back of, you know, a big shed somewhere. And of course, as Philip mentioned earlier on, it's still not accessible so much that way. Or my equal concern actually is people having to just say, sorry, we're full. So we've got a whole load of great stuff, but we've got no idea how we can take more. And probably when there's this build-up of interest, it's about how, just to link in the point that was being made, it's that ability to curate the material to say that actually, yeah, probably 90% of what's coming in is good stuff. Of that, 30% of it's really great. We'd absolutely want to preserve that. The rest of it we might struggle. But you need the volunteers or the staff and the guidance to do that. And I think that's certainly, you know, talking about challenges in the sector going forward. You know, that's there's always pressure on time and money. You know, it's nothing new. But it's also even that physical pressure. You know, if certainly in our part of the world, in southern Scotland, you know, there's so much a sense from the local authorities that they want to have fewer and fewer and fewer buildings, and that's great. But the less square meters you have, the less space there is to keep those archives in that storeroom, etc. So it's always a worry.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That kind of potential of where can these be collected, either in physical spaces or in digital spaces as well, to ensure they're going to be there for the future. Crikey, that's hard though this week. Good luck. Helena, Philip. Going back to the question of, yeah, so why are these, from the National Archives perspective, why are these collections important? Why should they be preserved?
I think the simple answer is that sports are a mirror to society. I think we've already had that touched upon. You know, as has been mentioned previously, as Karl made this point, you know, sporting archives tell you about social attitudes, class division, economic realities. They're all there, and an archival landscape that did not have sporting records would be an incomplete landscape of society. Because I think, as I sort of said previously, it's such a central element of what we do in our leisure time for so many people. So I think, and because it is usually organised, it has societal benefits which are shared. So from TNA's point of view, a viable and sustainable set of sporting archives is utterly crucial if we're to have archive collections that are fully representative of the society that we're serving. It's really a bit like the enfranchisement of wider civil society, because it's also true of archives for charities, of lobby groups, etc. They're all part of that mix of the ecosystem of a pluralistic society, and that is only pluralistic if the archives of many different types of organizations survive and can be interrogated by future generations. Societies that are more monocultural and more authoritarian, I suspect, are less interested in that variety of narratives that are competing for attention for future generations. So I think that's if you like the philosophical answer why it's so important to have sporting records.
No, thanks, Philip. Yeah, in a nutshell, I think that was great, and it also kind of touched on that reminder of ensuring that these are the collections in the most diverse way they can be, and I think sometimes that is still missing. We're still not properly representing what the sporting heritage and the sporting past of the nation is, and it's a massive need to try and shift that and ensure we do that better going forward. Helena, I've a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I don't think I can follow Philip. He articulated that beautifully. I've been in the fortunate position where I have seen the faces light up, when I worked at Liverpool Record Office with those sporting collections, having school groups in where, they got to handle, old rattles from match days, programme things. It was you could use these collections in a way that you couldn't use many of the others. Even if that wasn't your team, these classes, these school groups got it. They got the importance of it. It really did bring history. I mean, I know it's a cliche, but it did bring history alive to them. It did in a way that I couldn't have used other collections. So yeah, that is kind of why as well. I think why we need to not lose focus of that.
Well, I'm totally biased, but I totally agree. They are the most important collection. I think, what you've demonstrated throughout the last kind of hour and a bit is that they are incredibly important collections to so many different people in so many different ways, and yet they are incredibly at risk. And there's, we're sitting here talking in this kind of virtual room about it, but it's then how do we change that and how do we make sure that that goes forward? And all of your kind of participation and, in the next half an hour, I think massively helps us as an organisation to help think about that. And hopefully make those arguments to convince other people to come along with us and make that work. So thank you to all of our panellists. I'm going to send everybody off for 10 minutes to have a break and get a cuppa, and then invite you all to come back at, I'm just going to look at Fran, 5 to 12? 5 to 12 for a conversation and a discussion and any questions that you've got for the panellists. And I'll be in the background at that point, trying to rest the throat. But thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate your time.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope everybody's had a chance to stretch their legs and have a cup of tea. So this is the second half of our session. So this is our informal chat side of the webinar. So you're more than welcome to put your cameras on if you would like to, and to take yourself off mute, and we will just chat as a group, picking up on some of the points that we came across and covered in the webinar. So I wanted to start. Does anybody have any questions for any of our panelists before we get into a more deeper discussion? Is there anything anybody would like to ask any of them or pick their brains? Oh, there's a resounding silence. Well, if you do think of anything as we're going along, do just shout out. And is anybody working with a collection that they would consider being at risk at the moment and would like to share it? One of the key points of this sort of second half informal session is to raise awareness of collections that are at risk. So if you've got a project that you're working on, please do tell us about it. Alison, since you've put your camera on, can I ask you to tell us a little bit more about your Greyhound project?
Yeah, certainly. It's something that I've been interested in all my life. We've been involved in greyhound racing, but I've worked in museums in mostly social and industrial history in the Yorkshire area. And with the centenary, there's a group of like-minded people that want to celebrate the centenary of greyhound racing next year, but also are aware that there's a lot of older people, lots of tracks closing, and so a lot of this material is being either dispersed or going, and it's sort of how best to sort of bring it together, because there is no collection as such at the minute, so it's at risk from that level. There's some items held by the regulatory body of greyhound racing, so they've got some stuff, but it's not kept to archive standard, but at least they've got it. And then there's all the other stuff that's in the personal collection, which is suffering the same information as Kenny said. So it's about how to sort of raise it as an issue, highlight the great stuff, which we're hoping to do next year with an exhibition, but then also thinking more long term about how we can preserve it and share it. So on that score, I'm sort of thinking about a digital collecting device that allows individuals and other groups and to share what they've got and share their memories. So that's where it's at the minute, but there's no staff, no money. So we need to sort of work out how we're going to collectively arrange that, plan for it, and fund it.
Well, it sounds like it would make a great heritage fund application. So I'm sure that's on your radar.
It is, but it's about with the heritage fund, it's got to have some sort of collective groupage that will steer that. So a steering committee, and so I'm sort of seeing that the few people working on the exhibition, then we might get more people out of the woodwork and get to that more formal arrangement that then it could go forward into that. So it's about, I think it's seed funding and sort of building that awareness and then getting the support to get it to that next stage. But yes, that's an ultimate goal. And then in an ideal world, a museum like the National Horse Racing Museum, if we could have a National Greyhound Racing Museum, that would be the ultimate end goal.
Well, yes, that would be ideal. I mean, all I can say is let us know how you get on, and if we can share your progress or when you've got your exhibition up and running. If you share it with us at Sporting Heritage, we will more than happily promote it out across our channels. And if there's people we can put you in touch with, particularly around, and there are a number of different sporting collections we know that have used sort of digital collecting with digital platforms. So if we can be of any help, just let us know, and we'll see who we can sort of put you in touch with. Because it's always good to benefit from other people's experience.
It is, yes. Brilliant. Yeah, there's no point trying to find it out all yourself. So yeah, any sort of collective knowledge, I'll gladly assimilate.
Yeah, well, we'll happily signpost. Fiona, can I call on you? You tell us about the women's cricket in Scotland, your project.
Yes. Hi, Fran.
Hi, Fiona.
I was really interested to just hear the people describing the collections at risk, and I was just keen to share because ours in a way is at risk because there's mostly unknown. So it's a hidden history that we're trying to unearth, and we've actually had a grant from Sporting Heritage to unearth some of the slightly more recent history from about 2000. But before the year 2000, we're in a mostly unknown space. I think we've maybe found out about 8 key dates with maybe a heading. There was a match or there was an event, and that's it. So the next stage of our project is to try to unearth some of that unknown. So I don't know whether any of the panel have got any suggestions for going about that, or just any tips. And Fran, anywhere we can get any more funding to do that bit before 2000, that'd be useful as well.
That might be a separate conversation. But yes, panelists, for hidden histories, obviously Fiona's working with the story of women's cricket in Scotland. Have any of you got any experience of sort of trying to uncover those hidden histories where you don't know quite where to start, or where you pull that information together? Or anybody else on the call, if you've got experience of that, would you like to share it? Kenny?
Yeah, an example actually from even kind of more difficult situation. I was asked to give a talk to a local history group last year, and I was kind of given the challenge of, well, Kenny, you're interested in so many different parts of history. Give us a talk on something you know nothing about. And I sort of took this as a bit of a challenge, and I thought, oh, what could I do that's quite interesting? And when I used to look at old newspapers for things, there's always reports about quoits, the sport of quoits, throwing metal rings into clay beds. And I thought, well, I'll take up this, it's kind of tongue in cheek, I'll do a talk on quoits. And it was actually fascinating. And one time at Berwickshire, it was the biggest sport, bigger than football, rugby, anything else. Every village, every farm had a quoits team. And it's completely gone. There's not one team left now. The local newspapers were great. And, it's amazing, go back 20, 30 years, local national press. And so much of it's digitized online now. So I think if you're wanting to fix down dates and so on, and you haven't got actual archive records, that'd be a great way to try and, start off. But the other thing is just personal connections. You'll if you can find someone who'll know someone else, will know someone else, you'll be amazed what knowledge is still out there. And we had this in the local football league, East Scotland League, that no records at all, no minute books, nothing. Even the kind of 1990 stuff that was on a computer, the old secretary's laptop died, he hadn't backed it up, all this kind of stuff. And then just last year, it was the league centenary. Off the back of it, a guy used to be a journalist at the Edinburgh Evening News came and said, oh, from the 1970s through until about 15 years ago, I used to keep a handwritten record of every club's matches in the season and all the goal scorers and when the date was and what the result was. And he gave us this box. And it's the history of the league for about 30 years. No one even knew he'd ever kept it. No one ever knew the league hadn't kept it, the SFA hadn't kept it. So, yeah, my two bits of advice would just be press can be great where you don't actually have the records themselves. Until quite recently, the detail that, because there was loads of journalists and they were writing quality stuff. And then secondly, just that try and build a chain of people you'll be amazed who might come around it. But just to finish off, I'd like to say, it's really challenging. I'm sure that you've only got, this really limited information from before 2000. But is it not really exciting as well? Because it's like you're like an explorer. You're going out into the unknown to try and reclaim the history of, in your case, women's cricket. I think that's quite brilliant. That's exciting because you're going to find out stuff that no one knew, or even better, you're going to rediscover things that people are going to say, "Oh, I remember that. I'd forgotten all about that." And I think that's great. So good luck to you.
And I should say thank you to Helena because she's put in some National Archives funding links in the chat for you, Fiona. So it might be worth if they would be appropriate. I'll circulate them to everybody. Helena, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just talking about those hidden histories. Again, going back to my time at Liverpool Record Office, I worked with an local organisation called the Heritage Development Company, and they were really keen to uncover black boxers in Liverpool. So they wanted to do an exhibition to celebrate sort of these unknown histories. I didn't know much about it at all. And it was like, where do you start? And I think, just like Kenny said, you start by talking to people. They knew people who had things in their attic, things in their loft. It helped that they identified the record office as a partner so they could have these conversations and then had a case to showcase. They had three exhibition cases to showcase what came out of it. But it really was, this wasn't history that was really written down. There was the local press, there was there was various photographs, various bits, but a lot of it was personal memories and memorabilia as well that people had kept from the different matches. So I think it's deeply rewarding when you get to the point where you can actually put on an exhibition or you've got a collection of documents. I don't think there's anything better than that, but it's working with those people who have got the information.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, we're really keen in 2028. It's 150 years since the first women's cricket match in Scotland. So we're working towards that as our kind of final aim. So just trying to gather information about different bits of history. But thanks very much.
I think just to round that off, and you may have tried this approach already. There's sometimes great power in actually saying we don't know, or we have these dates, but we've got this massive gap, or we know 6 of a team of 14 was one of your family members. You know, can you help us fill the gap? So it's almost sometimes when you're working with heritage, and particularly with the sort of traditional heritage organisations, they're seen as, you know, these sort of keepers of the knowledge, and the expectation is that you should know everything, or that information has been kept. But as we all know, with the way that record keeping works, and changes and collections then being at risk, is that actually the heritage record across, you know, the whole of the UK, not just sport, is patchy. So sometimes there is power in saying, we don't know this, can you help us fill that gap? Rather than saying, this is what we know at the moment. You sort of flip it and try and engage people that way. And then sometimes that just jogs people's memory in a different way. Has anybody else worked on projects or is working?
Yeah.
Similar? Sorry, Fiona, go on.
Oh no, I was just saying that's helpful. Actually, I'm just writing my report for the bit we do know at the moment. So I'm just going to add in a wee section with a list of what we don't know and see if we can get some help just from the people that read the things about what we do know. They might well be ones who then can take us on the next stage in our journey. So.
And it also sort of gets across that idea of the sort of the scope of what you're looking at. It's not quite a sporting heritage example, but if you've ever been to the Titanic exhibition at Southampton Museum, they have, at the end, they have a big photo board of all the passengers and crew, and there's so many of them are blanked out. You know, they're just the silhouette of the head and shoulders, and it just shows how little we know about some of those people. Some people we know lots about, you know, and there are the famous people within that story, that piece of history that are well known. But so many people, so many of the stories of those people have been lost. Excuse me. So it's getting across that idea of the scope of what is missing, and therefore sometimes that can galvanize people to get involved and go, oh, actually, maybe, you know, maybe I did know somebody who was that, or I'll just check, or I'll just ask with my family member. So because sometimes people think, oh, maybe you're just missing 1 or 2 names, but actually if you say, well, actually we're looking for, you know, whole teams or whole years worth of information, you know, was your family involved in a particular event or activity that might have crossed over with this sport, you know, in this time. You know, it's just thinking of different sort of perspectives to sort of galvanize people to come together.
Yeah, thank you.
So does anybody else want to chip in with projects that they're working on at the moment? Everybody's very quiet. So we've talked about collections themselves and how collection items can be at risk, or some of the sort of instances where collections can become at risk. The key one we sort of talked about is sort of moving location and then it being separated from those original sources. But I think it's important to chat about, and I'm going to come to some of the panelists to chat about this in a moment, that there are other things that you can sort of put in place to mitigate your collection becoming at risk in the future. And some of that is around your governance, some of it is around your collection management processes. I've worked with a couple of collections where it looked like, because their trustees were all of a certain age, that possibly within the next 5 to 10 years, they were looking at where they might then deposit their collection for the future, because they had no real succession plan. There was nobody coming up through the ranks, and therefore this was going to put their collection at risk, but they could see that was coming. So sometimes it's not about doing that, right, the collection's at risk now. It's thinking and building in that sort of mitigation about collections at risk into your sort of future planning. I don't know how many of you work with organisations that have sort of forward plans or plans within funding applications where you can actually put in some of that work. Have any of our panellists worked like that at all? No, so I shall continue with some of my examples then. So the board of trustees that I was working with, they realised, and this is not uncommon, that they didn't actually own the collection they were looking after. It was owned by a tangential organisation. So they were a military museum, and the collection was actually owned by the regimental association. So we were talking about what was going to happen to their collection, and actually we had to stop and say, well, actually, it's not your collection. So they had to sort out a memorandum of understanding, because actually the Regimental Association didn't want to be managing the collection. They were happy to be the collection holders, but actually the management and preservation of the collection sat with the trustees. So they had an unusual setup. And sometimes if it's not clear within your organisation, that can further down the line put your collection at risk. So it's always worth bottoming out who your collection holders are. And particularly if you're working on a project where you're taking collections in, that you're very clear who has that legal responsibility over your collections. And as long as that is really clearly laid out in a document and to those who are donating to your collection, that will help prevent your collection from being at risk in the future. I don't know if anybody else has had anything like that. So Kev's just put something in there. So Kev's put in the chat, yes, transparent approach to what's missing and what's known was used. So yes, talking about what's not known was used by the Women in Rugby League. So yes, we could put you in touch with the Women in Rugby League project if you would like to, Fiona, for that sort of approach. We could put you in touch with Julia Lee and her colleagues there. So are there any other threats that anybody else has come across for collections at risk before I trot on to other examples? I want to hear from those who are in the group. Are there any sort of things that we've not covered that are pertinent to what you're working on? Isabella, yes, tell us about Hearts.
Hi, Fran.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. So I work at Hearts Museum. Heart of Midlothian, as you may well know, it's a stadium, it's a club. And as Fran mentioned, the club is a working club. It's always super busy. There's always events going on. So the heritage department is kind of like a really tiny, teeny team of people working towards attempting to preserve as much as we can. And the team has done a wonderful job. The club turned 150 years old last year. And we have amazing memorabilia from the early years as well, and minute books and archives documents. And it's been great to see what they've been doing. But I only joined this team 5 months ago now. And immediately the first thing that came to my mind was this is a collection that is at huge risk. The museum setup is amazing, and the connections with the community they have are really strong, which is great. But the actual collection, I found that it's not stored properly. Basically, what I first had to do was creating an inventory of what we have, and I'm still doing that. I think it will take me a lot longer than everyone expected, because mostly the history of the collection storage changed from place to place. It didn't really have a one house, and we still don't have one house for the big collection we have. So as Karl mentioned, it was this moment of movement of the collection from one big storage in Blackhall to another storage that's outside the stadium. Many hands worked in that project, people who were not heritage professionals, just people wanting to help, but that didn't really help the collection in the end, because many boxes turn out in places they shouldn't have. So we don't know where they are. It's not that they're missing, we know they're somewhere. But I've had to start sort of like from scratch, just to begin a full inventory to know what we have. Many of the things that are coming out now, nobody knew they were in the collection. And we also do have a database. We use Axial, which in theory sounds amazing, and it's great to have that support. But if you work with one online database that is not updated, sometimes that can make things even harder for everyone in the day-to-day routines of a museum. So yeah, I've been just working on a huge inventory project, starting with one of the 4 to 5 rooms that we have different storage in. Just doing the first one now. So it's quite a big task. It's just myself doing it at the moment, mostly because of the space. It's a teeny tiny cupboard. I only fit in there. I need to take boxes out every time I want to go in. So yeah, it's just a massive, massive project. And as the panel described, it first is physical, because you have to access these things. You have to know what they are. You have to know where they are. You have to know how to look after them if they're fragile, and they need different conservation or preservation approaches. And then secondly, we have this access or more cultural approach on the collections at risk. And this is something that in a second base, we've been trying to open up the collection to the general public more widely, because people who come to the museum, they love it, but they don't know that we have so much more in the storage that still needs to be discovered. They don't know. So they're quite happy with the museum. It's a small museum. You'll see it if you come on Friday to the to our conference day. But there's so much more. So we're trying to open up the collection, and the way we're doing it is we actually, the theme of this year's National Sporting Heritage came a good time for us, because we've been trying to open it up in different ways, and this collections at risk topic led us to do some series of posts on Instagram and social media, showing people what we do in the backstage. And many people we've had really good comments from the general public, because they don't really know what we do, apart from being the heritage and telling them about the history and stats of Hearts, which is what my colleague Davey, he knows all the stats, all the goals. But yeah, all the material and physical work that is required by our collection, we're trying to open it up. And we want to, so we basically divided the theme of collections at risk in sort of 5 stages. So we start with a post about how we preserve different materials we have. Then we're posting on digitizing, how we want to do then the transcribathon. I don't know if you heard about what we've done before. This is the second stage of transcribing our minute books that come from the 1890s. So we're organized an event that's happening next week on Thursday, in which we invite people to come, and we're doing a full exercise on transcribing the earliest minutes. Then the 4th stage is interpreting. So after transcribing, which is a great job to do, what do you do with these transcriptions? It's not all about preserving for the sake of preserving. It's also because you want to use these things in the future, and there's a meaning behind it. So the next stage is interpreting. And then the last step for us will be sharing, because we want to be open. We want for people, not just us sharing things, the heritage, but also the rest of the public to be able to share and create a conversation surrounding our collections. In that way, opening up. It's not always that you have to create an exhibition or an event, but it's something that people can come to whenever they want. And we're really happy to open the collection like that.
Yeah, I saw that you were advertising your transcribathons again, and it made me think of Davey, because he's talked about them so enthusiastically in the past. I know that you've had great take up, and I would highly recommend, if you don't follow Hearts on social media, your posts recently have been brilliant. It's been really good to see what you've been doing behind the scenes. But I think the last time we spoke, you were talking about being in the cupboard, and now seeing your posts, I can see exactly what you mean. And I think
still there.
You've summed up in a nutshell a concept which I think, when you're a collection holder or trying to preserve your heritage, can be a bit of an overwhelming idea, that looking after a collection and preserving it for the future it's incredibly time consuming. It can be a life's work, but all you can hope to do is hand it on in a better condition than you took it on, because everything that you do in preserving that collection removes it from being at risk. And as long as you can document your decision-making processes and can say what you've done to it, you hand it on to another custodian, who hopefully will then take up the reins and continue your work. But you're quite right. I mean, the number of times where, and I'm sure Justine will concur, we speak to collections and they say, well, we've got our collection is at risk. The trustee who had it all in their house has just passed away. They're selling the house. Our national governing body is moving or is closing. We don't know what to do with it. And then we say, well, what have you got? And they say, well, it's sort of 6, 10, 12 boxes. We're like, no, but what have you got? They're like, oh, well, no, it's in boxes. And we're like, but do you have a list? And they're like, oh, well, we can tell you what our top highlights are. We're like, actually, what the best thing you can do for your collection is exactly what you're doing, Isabella, which is doing that inventory stage. And although it is time consuming, it will absolutely bear fruit further down the line. I know, speaking to a colleague many years ago, when everybody was first starting to digitize their collections, there was a great temptation just to digitize the highlights of your collection. And actually, it's by only making by a list of everything can you see where all those really interesting nuances and connections come from things that you weren't expecting. You may have your beautiful star item, but further down in a box that you've never looked before, there might be a medal or a photograph or a snippet from a diary that links to it. And unless you've got everything listed, it's really hard to articulate and advocate for your collection and how you could save it. So I wish you luck with it. And as Isabella mentioned, we've got an in-person Collections at Risk study day being hosted very kindly by Heart of Midlothian on Friday. It's not too late to book. If you're north of the border and would like to come to Edinburgh, I'll put the link in the chat in a moment. Would any of our panellists like to come in on any of those points that have been raised by our other speakers?
Just follow up what Isabella said, just making the point that kind of cataloging is key. You know, quite often it's the work that people don't see, that the public doesn't see, and Isabella's given a really good example of how to make it more visible and how to engage the public with the background work that people wouldn't normally see, and even get them involved. I mean, the idea of the Transcribe-a-thon is great, you know, and you know, there are numerous volunteer groups, different shapes and forms, who may be interested in getting involved to help with the cataloging and recording of your collections. But you know, as has been said, unless you know exactly what you have, how can you properly manage it and use it?
And it's always, we always sort of try and stress that although it is a long and drawn out process creating an inventory for your, or creating a list for your collection, that inventory stage sort of listing, not cataloguing because it's not a catalogue record, but that inventory listing, both whether you're using the archives approach or whether you're using a museums approach, can just be 1 or 2 lines per item and a photograph if you've got the opportunity to photograph, that you can pull together something that you can then work with going forward quite quickly. I wanted to pick up on that idea of digital items, and I know that both Isabella and Kenny, you were having a chat in the chat thread about digital items. I wanted to see if the panel or anybody else in the room had any top tips on how you're making sure that you've got a good flow of digital items coming into your collection, or are you having trouble collecting digital material? Has anybody got any comments? Do Heart still produce a physical program, Isabella?
Yes, so we're still lucky that we are the old school program still. But yeah, I'm aware that many other clubs are not. And I know we have a club statistician, a club historian, and they're really into the old school, kind of like taking notes of everything happening. So I'm sure they would have that information, but it's not officially part of our collection yet. But I'm sure it's somewhere. You know, I think that's the problem with the digitizing world at the moment, is everyone thinks, yeah, they're going to be somewhere. There's going to be somewhere. But where are they is the question. Where can we find them all in the one spot would be ideal. So yeah, I think that's a big project that we haven't done yet, because we do have other kind of digital things that we're still questioning how to use, where to put. For example, the oral histories that we got from the Maroon Mile project that just wrapped up this year. We have more than 30 oral histories, which we show in our museum in the screens. People can go and hear them, but they're nowhere sort of accessible for the wider community yet. We don't know if we should use the Heart's official website to share them, or we should create a new one. So yeah, we're just still picking our brains on how to go about with that. So if anyone has any idea of how to catalog and share oral histories in a different way, welcome to hear that.
I know that the Oral History Society are always a good source of information if you've not looked at their site. And I know that the British Library used to take on sound recordings as part of their sound archive, but obviously they had a massive cyber attack not that long ago. So I'm not sure they're taking in more material. Karl, is any of the Commonwealth Games material this time round going to be digital, or is it all going to be hard copy? Do you know? And if it's going to be digital, what do you have in place to sort of save and preserve?
So I suppose at the moment we don't know. One of the key things is, I mean, there will still be some physical material, but yeah, this was probably the first kind of active in terms of collecting born digital material. So one thing we do already is web capture. So we are aware that, you know, websites constantly change, and capturing websites, taking snapshots and preserving them is one thing we are doing. So that's something we will do with Team Scotland. We're still at the very early stages of having an effective digital preservation strategy, because we, you know, in an ideal world, we would like a nice shiny digital preservation management system, which we haven't got. So it's kind of nuts and bolts. And as has been mentioned before, there's a lot of good guidance out there from Digital Preservation Coalition and from other places about how to kind of take the basic steps to ensure that digital material you take in will be still accessible in years to come. So basically making sure the formats are readable and the formats can be continue to be migrated into readable format. So that's the key issue we have, and it's something that we'll be working with Commonwealth Games Scotland on.
Yes, I must admit I've been broaching it with some of my clients outside of sporting heritage, is how they can start collecting born digital material in a way that is not only sort of future-proofing it from a collection point of view, but also from a revenue cost, because obviously there is always a cost involved in cloud storage or external hard drives, you know, whichever way you do it. And I think this is going to become more and more pertinent for the sector as we move more that way.
Yeah, I think that is a key thing, you know. It's again, it's come up kind of the fact that, you know, digital storage isn't free. You know, in the same way as having to physically buy our acid-free archive boxes, which aren't cheap. Long-term digital storage isn't cheap either, and I think it's a cost that a lot of people haven't really considered yet, and it's something that's obviously going to become an increasing issue over time.
Yes, there's one of my clients I'm working with. They very they were part of a larger network who very kindly, with a substantial amount of money, digitized records across a whole group of museums on the basis that they would host them on a platform, a bit like a Find My Past type platform. And the hosting was meant to last for 10 years. The project hasn't been the success they were hoping it was going to be, so the platform's closing. So they're now giving the digitized material back to the individual organizations, which is fantastic. They're getting back all this really high-res digitized material, but obviously the preservation and the hosting of that material was never factored into any of their original budgets. So there's been lots of sort of trying to work out how we're going to do it when this external hard drive arrives. And I think, going back to the idea of Isabella hunting in cupboards for bits of collection, is going to be much harder once there is more born digital material, because you can't go and search around other people's computers or servers, or, you know, other people's cloud storage, just to check in case they've got the missing program or the oral history that you're looking for. So I think there's all those sorts of issues around collections being at risk. You know, we talk about personal collections now, but I think it's going to be people's personal digital collections which are going to be much harder. So Helena and Philip have both put some good links into the chat, as has Alison, about the Living Archive up in the northeast of England. We are dead on 12:30 now, so we've covered a lot of ground. I'd like to thank all of our panellists today. So Jennie, Kenny, Helena, Philip and Karl, and Justine for chairing the opening section of today when I know she's not feeling 100%, so sterling work. And thank you to everybody who has attended. We will do a light edit on this recording and it will be shared as a legacy piece. I will save all the chat, and I will separate all the slides that have been put into the chat and send those round. We have, as I say, our Collections at Risk Study Day on Friday in Edinburgh, if anybody would like to join us. And please do get involved in National Sporting Heritage Day on the 30th of September, so that's Tuesday next week, and tag us in on your socials if you're able to, and we will more than happily shout about all your sporting stories and sporting activity. Justine, is there anything else you would like to say before we close?
No, big thank you to Fran for organising the event and to the panellists and everybody else. It's been brilliant listening to all of those different stories. And again, it's just helping jog my memory with where we are and what we can do to support you. And a plug for there's a seminar on the National Sporting Heritage Day itself, an international one looking at collections and how internationally we support that kind of work. So if that's of interest, please do join in. And we've got some intangible heritage project work happening, which again links to some of the at-risk collections today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Justine. So thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at another event soon. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.